I'm Gary LaRude, and I'd like to give you an overview of policy-based governance for churches. This is intended as an introduction for those congregations considering whether to adopt policy-based governance who are just exploring the model. My own experience, I've been involved in adopting policy-based governance at two Unitarian Universalist churches, the First Unitarian Church of Dallas, and most recently, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashua, New Hampshire. Let's begin by answering the question, what is governance? To my view, it's simply how a group or body organizes itself to carry out its mission and vision, doing so in a way that's effective, efficient, and in harmony with its values. A governance model should provide a clear definition of the roles and responsibilities of the various constituencies within the church: the governing board, the minister, staff, committees, volunteers, and it should enable the governing board to focus on the long term, the church's vision, long-range goals, and policies, so the board does not have to be involved in managing the church's operations week to week. The governance system should build community, encourage programs, and empower initiative, and support growth if the church is growing. The policy governance model was originally developed by John Carver. It's an integrated system of governance that was first adopted by nonprofit organizations, and it has since been used and tailored by UU churches, a number of our districts, and most recently the Unitarian Universalist Association. Very simply, the governing board answers the question, where are we going? And the minister, staff, committees, and volunteers are charged with figuring out how are we going to get there. Adding a little more flesh to the skeleton, the governing board basically discerns the strategic goals, or what John Carver calls ends, and defines the limitations within which the church must operate. The minister, staff, committees, volunteers then work to achieve these goals within the limitations defined by the board. This slide shows the flow of authority and accountability in policy governance in a congregation that has congregational polity, which means where each congregation is autonomous. Basically, it begins with the church members who have the ultimate authority for the church. They elect a governing board to carry out the day-to-day operations and manage the church in the best interest of the members. The executive is delegated to by the governing board, and this may be an individual, in which case it's usually the minister, or a team. In the case of a team, the minister typically leads the team. And then the executive oversees the staff, which includes the actual paid staff, committees, and volunteers. Policy governance is an integrated governance system, as shown in this slide. The governing board has the responsibility to look to the congregation and the larger community and identify the needs in these areas. Then, by discerning and prioritizing these needs, the board articulates a set of goals to address the needs that are consistent with the church's vision and mission. These goals are provided to the executive, whether it's a single person or a team, and the executive, in concert with the staff that's actually paid, committees, and volunteers, offer programs and services to achieve the goals that have been identified by the governing board. The board monitors this process and, as necessary, refines the goals and the executive limitations. This closed-loop system is documented through 4 governance policies which are subservient to the church's bylaws. The bylaws provide the overarching governing document for the church. The 4 governance policies are, first of all, the governance process, which specifies the board's job and how the board will do its job. The board executive linkage policy describes the board's relationship to the executive and how the board will monitor executive performance. The strategic goals or ends define what the church aims to achieve, and the executive limitations policy sets the boundaries within which the executive and staff are free to operate. So at a high level, that's the policy-based governance model. As churches begin to explore this, there are a number of topics and questions that arise. For example, is our church big enough for policy-based governance? Or, I don't like the language. Executive, CEO, we're not a business. Should we have a single executive or a team? We're giving too much power to the minister or to the board or whomever. I don't want the board to lose visibility into what's going on. We spend every board meeting wordsmithing policies. I want to do something. Do we have to write all the policies before adopting policy-based governance? There aren't single answers to these questions, and these are all valid questions. It points to the need to tailor the model to fit the unique needs of each congregation. Adopting a new governance model is a big change, so the process generates lots of questions and requires considerable dialogue. Don't, though, become paralyzed by overanalyzing. At some point, you should just try it and then iterate to change it. One caution: policy governance won't build trust in a congregation if trust is lacking. If there are trust issues, policy governance and the discussion about it are likely just to make them worse. Going beyond the theory, I thought an example might help to clarify policy governance and how it's applied. So the following slides show some examples from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashua. This slide is the actual governance structure that shows the church membership and three committees, if you will, that the church elects: the nominating committee, a financial records review committee, and then the board of trustees. The board itself has a number of committees that report into it. These are either for historical reasons or at the time policy governance was enacted, the board felt more comfortable retaining certain responsibilities. The executive, in the case of the Nashua Church, is actually a team that includes the minister who leads the team and both staff and lay leadership. They oversee the programs and services that are enacted through the staff, the committees, and the volunteers. The Nashua Church has a written vision and mission, which existed prior to the implementation of policy governance. As part of the process of exploring policy governance, the Nashua Church tried to identify the things that it should be providing to the congregation and the larger community, and divided these into 6 areas initially: worship and spiritual development, religious education, congregational fellowship, community involvement, social and environmental justice, denominational presence, and then the one that was added subsequently was maintenance of our facility, since the building dates back to 1827 and is a historic structure that requires significant maintenance and upkeep. This slide shows an example, a subset, of some of the strategic goals under worship and spiritual development and also religious education. One thing to note is these goals are written in the present tense, and that's intentional under the Carver model. The next slide shows a couple of examples of the executive limitations that have been adopted by the Nashua Church. Note that these are written as what should not happen, not what is allowed to happen, and again, that's intentional. Adopting policy governance is not a fast process, and you can see the timeline that the church in Nashua followed, beginning with the study of policy governance in the 2002-2003 church year. That process took about 3 years before policy-based governance was initiated on a trial basis. The church decided that the 2005-2006 year, they would operate under policy-based governance as a trial. That was successful, which led to its formal adoption beginning in the 2006-2007 church year, and at that time the commissioning of a bylaws committee to update the church's bylaws to reflect the actual policy governance model. So in summary, policy-based governance has proven effective in UU churches. Some of the benefits that I've described: it better defines the roles and responsibilities among the players in a church. It allows the board to focus on the long-term and strategic questions facing the church, while empowering the paid staff, committees, and volunteers to do the work as defined by the goals. And it avoids the problem of having to ask the board for permission for any initiative. I think as such it enables us to better carry out our mission as a faith community. The implementation of the model can and should be tailored to the unique needs and circumstances of each congregation, and it's not set in concrete once it's established. It will evolve with time. There are lots of resources for further study. Books by John and Miriam Carver explain the model in great detail, and the UUA also has a wiki website on policy governance that provides a lot of insight into how it's been applied to various UU churches in the association. So I hope this has been helpful, and good luck with your exploration of it. I'm Gary LaRude.